The crystal tumbler hit the marble floor with a sound like a gunshot, scattering ice cubes and 18-year-old scotch across the polished stone. Marcus Chen didn't move. His hand remained suspended in the air where the glass had been, fingers still curved around phantom weight, eyes locked on the small leather portfolio the waitress held against her chest like a shield. Preparing and narrating this type of story took us long efforts and hard work. So if you are enjoying the story, please consider subscribing to our channel. What did you say? His voice came out strangled, barely above a whisper. The restaurant fell silent. Conversations died mid-sentence. Silverware stopped clinking. Even the pianist in the corner seemed to sense something had shifted in the air of Millionaire, the most exclusive restaurant in downtown Seattle, where reservations required 3 months' notice and entrees started at $80. The waitress, Elena, her name tag read, stood frozen beside his table, her face drained of color. She was young, maybe 23, with dark hair pulled back in a regulation bun and eyes the color of storm clouds. Her uniform was pressed but worn at the edges, the kind of worn that spoke of too many shifts, too many double shifts, too many hours standing when your feet screamed for rest. There was a small stain on her collar, barely visible, that she tried to cover with her apron strap. I said. She swallowed hard, her throat working. That's my brother's signature. On your portfolio. That's Danny's handwriting. Marcus finally moved, reaching down to grab the portfolio from where he'd set it on the table. His hands shook as he opened it, staring at the signature on the interior leather flap, the inscription he'd looked at 1,000 times over the past 6 years. To Mr. Chen, dream big, work hard, stay kind. Daniel Reeves, 2019. The handwriting was distinctive, all sharp angles and confident strokes, the kind of penmanship that belonged to someone who'd grown up before keyboards dominated everything. Someone who'd been taught that how you signed your name mattered. Daniel Reeves, Marcus said slowly, testing the name, watching her face. Your brother is Daniel Reeves? Was. The word came out broken. Elena's fingers tightened on the serving tray she still held, knuckles white. He was my brother. He died 6 years ago. The restaurant manager appeared then. A tall man with silver hair and the kind of practiced smile that could smooth over any situation. Miss Reeves, perhaps we should. No. Marcus held up a hand without looking at the manager, his eyes still fixed on Elena. Around them, the other diners had begun to whisper, phones emerging from purses and pockets. This was Seattle's power dining room, where tech executives and venture capitalists brokered million-dollar deals over grass-fed ribeyes. Marcus Chen was recognizable here, the 38-year-old CEO of Zenith Technologies, whose artificial intelligence platform had revolutionized healthcare diagnostics, whose face had graced the covers of Forbes and Wired in Time. But right now, none of that mattered. Sit down, Marcus said, gesturing to the empty chair across from him. Please. Elena looked at the manager, who nodded reluctantly, though his expression suggested this conversation would be happening in his office later, that there would be consequences for disrupting a patron's dinner, for speaking out of turn, for existing too loudly in a space where servers were meant to be invisible. She sat carefully, perching on the edge of the chair as if ready to bolt. Up close, Marcus could see the exhaustion etched into her face. Dark circles under her eyes, the gauntness of someone who skipped meals, the slight tremor in her hands that spoke of too much coffee and not enough sleep. Her fingernails were cut short, practical, with no polish. There was a small burn scar on her left wrist, the kind you get from kitchen work, from moving too fast around hot surfaces. Tell me about him, Marcus said quietly. Tell me about Daniel. Elena's eyes filled with tears, but she blinked them back with the practiced efficiency of someone who'd learned not to cry in public, who couldn't afford the luxury of breaking down. Why do you have his portfolio? How do you? She stopped, shaking her head. I don't understand. Danny worked at a coffee shop. He was saving money for college. He wanted to be an architect. He never mentioned knowing anyone like you. Marcus set the portfolio down between them, his fingers tracing the embossed initials. Dar. It was expensive leather, the kind that aged beautifully, developing character with time. He'd carried it every day for 6 years, used it in every major meeting, every presentation that mattered. It was 2019, he began, his voice rough. March 14th. I remember because it was Pi Day, and the coffee shop. What was it called? Redwood Roasters, Elena whispered. On Madison Street. Redwood Roasters. Marcus nodded, the memory crystallizing. I was there because my car had broken down 2 blocks away. Battery died. It was pouring rain, and I had a presentation in 45 minutes that could make or break my company. We were trying to secure Series B funding. Everything depended on this one meeting. He could still see it. The panic, the rain soaking through his suit jacket, his phone at 6% battery, his carefully prepared pitch deck on a laptop with no charger. The coffee shop had been a refuge, warm and smelling of espresso and cinnamon, filled with the low hum of conversation and the hiss of the steam wand. I came in completely soaked, completely frantic. I ordered something, I don't even remember what, and I was trying to figure out how to salvage the situation. The meeting was across town. I had no car, no Uber would come in that weather, and my presentation materials were falling apart because they'd gotten wet. Elena was listening intently now, tears tracking silently down her cheeks. The manager had backed away, giving them space, though Marcus could see him hovering near the kitchen door, ready to intervene if needed. Your brother was working the counter, Marcus continued. He saw me losing it, saw me trying to dry off my portfolio with napkins, saw me about to have a complete breakdown. And he said, Marcus paused, remembering the calm in that young man's voice, the steadiness that had cut through his panic. He said, looks like you're having one of those days where the universe is testing how badly you want something. A sob escaped Elena's throat, quickly stifled. That sounds like Danny. He always had these little philosophies. Mom used to say he collected wisdom like other people collected baseball cards. He asked me what I needed, Marcus said, and I told him, stupidly, desperately told this stranger everything. That I needed to get across town, that I needed to save my presentation, that everything I'd worked for was falling apart. And he didn't hesitate. He told his manager he was taking his break, grabbed his raincoat, and walked me to his car. Marcus could still remember the ancient Honda Civic, held together by hope and duct tape, with a check engine light that Danny had admitted had been on for 6 months. The interior had smelled like old coffee and new books, and there'd been a stack of architecture magazines in the back seat. He drove me to my meeting, Marcus said, waited outside for an hour in his car, even though his break was only 15 minutes. When I came out, we'd secured the funding, by the way, $12 million. He was sitting there reading a book about the Bauhaus movement. I tried to pay him, tried to give him everything I had in my wallet. He refused. Of course he did. Elena's voice was thick with grief and pride. Danny never wanted payment for being decent. He saw this portfolio in my hands. It was old, falling apart, held together with rubber bands. And he said he had something better in his trunk. Said he'd bought it at an estate sale, thought it was beautiful, but he'd never used it because it felt too fancy for coffee shop wages. Marcus picked up the portfolio, holding it like something sacred. He gave it to me, signed it, told me that when I made it big, when I became whoever I was meant to become, I should remember that success meant nothing if you forgot to stay kind. He said kindness was the only thing that mattered in the end. The restaurant had gone completely silent now. Even the pianist had stopped, the last notes fading into breathless quiet. The other diners were watching openly, some with phones still recording, capturing this moment of raw emotion in a space usually reserved for calculated networking and casual displays of wealth. I asked him his name, Marcus said, asked how I could repay him. He just smiled and said, dream big, work hard, stay kind. That's the only payment I need. Pass it on someday. Elena covered her face with her hands, shoulders shaking with silent sobs. Marcus wanted to reach across the table, wanted to offer comfort, but something held him back. The knowledge that he was a stranger, that he didn't have the right to her grief, that his story was just one small piece of a larger life he'd known nothing about. What happened to him? Marcus asked gently. How did he die? Elena lowered her hands slowly, wiping her eyes with the rough cloth napkin she'd pulled from her apron. When she looked up, There was something hard in her expression, something that spoke of anger held in check for far too long. "He was murdered," she said flatly. "March 19th, 2019. 5 days after he met you." The words hit Marcus like a physical blow. The restaurant seemed to tilt, the warm lighting suddenly too bright, too harsh. Around them, the whispers intensified, a wave of shock rippling through the room. "He was walking home from his shift," Elena continued, her voice steady now, rehearsed from having told the story too many times to too many officials who hadn't cared enough. 10:30 at night. Someone shot him 3 blocks from our apartment. They never found who did it. The police said it was probably a robbery gone wrong. Even though his wallet was still in his pocket, his phone was still in his hand. They said he was probably in the wrong place at wrong time. They said these things happen. Her hands clenched into fists on the table. They said a lot of things. None of them mattered because Danny was still dead, and they stopped investigating after 3 weeks because there were no leads and my brother's life apparently wasn't worth the resources. Marcus felt something crack open inside his chest, a fault line of guilt and grief for a young man he'd barely known, who'd shown him kindness when he'd needed it most, who'd given him a gift that had become a talisman, a reminder of who he wanted to be. "Elena, Don't," she cut him off. "Don't apologize. I've heard enough apologies to last a lifetime. Everyone was sorry. The police were sorry. The mayor's office was sorry when I wrote them letters. The news was sorry when they gave his death 15 seconds on the evening broadcast. Sorry doesn't bring him back. Sorry doesn't find his killer. Sorry is just a word people say when they want to feel better about doing nothing." The manager was moving closer now, clearly uncomfortable with the direction this conversation had taken, with the way Elena's voice was rising, with the spectacle unfolding in his carefully curated space. But Marcus held up his hand again, and something in his expression made the manager stop. This was Marcus Chen, whose company had brought in $500 million last quarter, whose name carried weight in every tech circle in the city. If he wanted this conversation to continue, it would continue. "Why did you recognize the signature?" Marcus asked. "The portfolio. Why did it matter?" Elena's laugh was bitter, broken. "Because I gave it to him. I found it at an estate sale in Capitol Hill, back when we used to go together on Sunday mornings. It was our thing, hunting through dead people stuff, finding treasures in trash, imagining the lives behind the objects. I bought it for Danny's 21st birthday, had it engraved with his initials. Spent 3 months' worth of tip money on it because he was obsessed with craftsmanship, with quality, with things that were built to last." She looked at the portfolio with an expression Marcus couldn't read, loss and love and something like wonder. "I never saw it again after his birthday. I asked him once where it was, and he just smiled that Danny smile and said he'd given it to someone who needed it more. I was so mad at him. I said he never appreciated anything, that he gave everything away, that he needed to learn to keep things for himself." Her voice broke. "And now you're sitting here 6 years later, still carrying it, still using it. And Danny's gone. And I'm serving you scotch that costs more than I make in a week. And you didn't even know his name until 5 minutes ago." The accusation hung in the air, sharp and undeniable. Marcus felt it land, felt the weight of his ignorance, his privilege, his ability to move through the world carrying pieces of people's lives without understanding the cost. "You're right," he said simply. "I didn't know, and I should have. I should have found him, thanked him properly, made sure he knew that what he did mattered." "Did it?" Elena's eyes burned with challenge. "Did it matter? You got your funding, built your company, became this." She gestured around the restaurant, at the wealth and power and prestige that surrounded him. "And Danny's still dead. So tell me, Mr. Chen, did his kindness actually matter in the end?" The question echoed through the restaurant, through the silence that had become expectant, hungry for his answer. Marcus looked down at the portfolio, at the signature he'd traced countless times, at the words that had become his personal mantra. "Yes," he said quietly. "It mattered. It matters. I've built my entire company on the principle he taught me in 15 minutes. That technology should serve humanity, that success without compassion is meaningless, that the measure of who we are is how we treat people when they can't offer us anything in return." He looked up, meeting Elena's eyes. But you're also right that it's not enough. That Danny deserved better than to be forgotten, than to be a cold case file gathering dust, than to have his murder dismissed as random violence. And you deserve better than to be serving me dinner while carrying the weight of that loss alone. The manager took another step forward, his expression now openly anxious. Mr. Chen, Miss Reeves, perhaps we should. How much do you pay her? Marcus interrupted, his voice sharp. The manager blinked, clearly caught off guard. I'm sorry. Elena, how much do you pay her per hour? Mr. Chen, I don't think that's. $12.50, Elena said flatly. Plus tips, which are pooled and split among all servers. Last month I made $2,200 total, working 55 hours a week. Marcus did the math quickly, his mind the same one that had built algorithms and revenue models and projections that turned millions into billions. That's barely $30,000 a year if you're lucky. I have 2 jobs, Elena added, her voice steady despite the tears still wet on her cheeks. I work here 4 nights a week, and I work at a grocery store in Ballard the other 3 days. I'm trying to save money to go back to school. Danny had life insurance, $20,000. I used it to pay off his student loans and cover his funeral. I'm 23 years old. I live in a studio apartment with 2 roommates, and I haven't had a day off in 6 months. Around them, the restaurant had become a stage, the diners an audience bearing witness to this collision of worlds. Some looked uncomfortable, confronted with realities they usually kept at arm's length. Others looked moved, tears in their own eyes. A few looked angry, whether at Elena for disrupting the evening or at the system that created such disparities. Marcus couldn't tell. He pulled out his phone, opened his banking app, and began typing. What are you doing? Elena asked, suspicion creeping into her voice. Fixing what I can fix, Marcus said. What's your Venmo? I don't want your money. Her words were ice. It's not charity, Marcus said, looking up at her. Consider it 6 years of unpaid gratitude. Your brother saved my company that day. Without him, Zenith Technologies wouldn't exist. I've made a fortune because a kid working at a coffee shop for minimum wage took time. He didn't have to help a stranger who couldn't help him back. Let me balance the scales a little. You can't buy your way out of guilt, Mr. Chen. You're right, he agreed. I can't. But I can make sure you don't have to work yourself into the ground while trying to achieve the same dreams your brother had. I can make sure his kindness actually changes something tangible in the world. Elena stared at him for a long moment, her expression cycling through emotions too complex to name. Anger, pride, desperation, hope, resentment, need. Finally, she pulled out her phone with shaking hands and showed him her Venmo username. Marcus typed in a number and hit send before she could see it. Her phone buzzed. She looked down at the screen, and all the color drained from her face. $50,000, she whispered. You just sent me $50,000. It's not enough, Marcus said. It's nowhere near enough to repay what your brother gave me. But it's a start. Take some time off. Go back to school. Breathe for the first time in 6 years. Elena's hands were shaking so badly now that she nearly dropped her phone. The manager rushed forward with a glass of water, his earlier annoyance replaced by concern that was either genuine or good customer service. Marcus couldn't tell which and didn't care. I can't accept this, Elena said, but her voice lacked conviction. She was looking at the number on her screen like it was written in a foreign language, like she couldn't quite process what it meant. Yes, you can, Marcus said gently. Your brother would want you to. He gave away a portfolio worth $200 to a stranger because he believed in paying kindness forward. Let me do the same. Elena's face crumpled then, all her careful composure shattering. She bent forward, pressing her forehead against the tablecloth, her shoulders heaving with sobs that she'd probably been holding in for years. The other servers exchanged glances, uncertain whether to intervene, whether to comfort their colleague or maintain the professional distance their jobs required. Marcus stood and moved around the table, crouching beside Elena's chair. He didn't touch her. That felt too presumptuous. But he stayed close, a steady presence while she broke apart. I'm sorry, she gasped between sobs. I'm so sorry. I shouldn't be. This is so unprofessional. Stop, Marcus said firmly. You have nothing to apologize for. You've been professional enough for 6 years. You've been strong enough for 6 years. You're allowed to fall apart. The manager appeared at Marcus's elbow, his expression a mixture of sympathy and concern. Miss Reeves, why don't you take the rest of the night off? We'll handle your tables. Elena looked up, her face blotchy and wet. But I need the tips. We'll pool them for you anyway, another server said. An older woman with kind eyes and gray streaks in her dark hair. Go home, honey. Take care of yourself. Elena stood on unsteady legs, and Marcus rose with her. She looked at him, this stranger who'd become something else in the span of 15 minutes, and said, Thank you, and I'm sorry I snapped at you. You didn't deserve that. Yes, I did, Marcus said. You were right about everything. I should have tried harder to find your brother, to thank him. I should have known his name. I carried his gift every day without understanding its cost. Elena wiped her eyes with the heels of her hands. He would have liked you. Danny always saw the best in people. He would have been proud to know his portfolio helped build something good. Can I ask you something? Marcus said as she turned to leave. She paused, looking back. Would you be willing to meet me for coffee sometime? Not. He held up his hands quickly. Not anything inappropriate. I just want to learn more about Daniel. Want to hear his story properly. And I want to talk to you about the investigation into his death. Elena's expression hardened again. There is no investigation. Case went cold 5 years ago. I've talked to the police every year on the anniversary. They don't care, Mr. Chen. My brother was just another statistic. Maybe it's time to change that, Marcus said quietly. I know some people who can look into things with fresh eyes. Would you be willing to let me try? She studied him for a long moment, and Marcus could see her weighing trust against cynicism, hope against the bitter lessons of experience. Finally, she nodded once, a small, cautious gesture. Okay, she said, but I've heard promises before. From reporters, from politicians, from lawyers who said they'd take the case pro bono and then disappeared after one phone call with the police. If you're going to make promises, Mr. Chen, you better mean them. I mean them, Marcus said, and he felt the weight of that commitment settle on his shoulders like physical pressure. Give me your number. I'll call you this week. They exchanged information, the transaction feeling too mundane for the magnitude of what had just happened. Elena gathered her things from the server station, accepted tearful hugs from her coworkers, and left through the kitchen door, disappearing into the October night. Marcus stood in the middle of Millionaire, surrounded by Seattle's elite, suddenly aware that he was still the center of attention. Phones were down now, put away with guilty speed as he met people's eyes, but he knew the footage was already out there, already being uploaded, captioned, shared across social media platforms with hashtags about wealth inequality and random acts of kindness. The manager approached, his professional mask firmly back in place. Mr. Chen, I apologize for the disruption to your evening. Your meal tonight is on the house, of course, and we'd like to offer. How long has Elena worked here? Marcus interrupted. About 18 months, the manager replied, clearly thrown by the question. And in 18 months, did you ever know that her brother was murdered? That she was working 2 jobs while trying to cope with that loss? The manager's expression flickered with something that might have been shame. We try not to pry into our staff's personal lives. That's a no, then. Marcus picked up the portfolio from the table, tucked it under his arm. I'd like to pay for my meal, actually, and I'd like to leave a tip. Mr. Chen, that's really not. Marcus pulled out his wallet, counted out $500 bills, and set them on the table. Make sure Elena gets this, on top of what the other servers are pooling for her. The manager stared at the money as if it might bite him. That's extraordinarily generous. It's the bare minimum, Marcus said. And I want you to know something. I'm going to be paying attention to how you treat her moving forward. If I hear that she's facing any consequences for what happened tonight, if she loses shifts or gets demoted or experiences any retaliation at all, I will make it my personal mission to ensure that this restaurant's reputation suffers. Are we clear? The manager's face went pale. Mr. Chen, we would never retaliate against an employee for. Good. Marcus cut him off. Then we don't have a problem. But I meant what I said. I'll be watching. He left without looking back, walking through the dining room where conversations were starting up again, where the momentary disruption to luxury was already being smoothed over, rationalized, packaged into an anecdote to share at cocktail parties. Outside, the October air was cold and sharp, carrying the smell of rain that hadn't yet fallen. Marcus's driver pulled up immediately, a black Tesla that probably cost more than Elena made in 2 years. He climbed in, gave his home address, and sat in the silent darkness as the city slid past the windows. His phone was already lighting up with messages. His PR team, asking if he'd seen the videos circulating online. His chief of staff wanting to know if he needed to prepare a statement. His mother, texting in all caps, "Marcus, what is happening? Are you okay?" The entire family group chat is going crazy. He ignored them all and opened his laptop, pulling up a private browser window. He typed in Daniel Reeves Murder Seattle 2019 and hit enter. The search results were sparse. A brief article from the Seattle Times, buried on page 6 of the local section. Man, 21, killed in Madison Valley shooting. The story gave basic facts. Daniel Christopher Reeves, shot at 10:37 p.m. on March 19th. Pronounced dead at the scene, no suspects, investigation ongoing. A follow-up article 2 weeks later, even shorter. Police seek information in Madison Valley homicide. A tip line number that probably didn't work anymore. A photo of Danny that looked like it had been taken from his social media. A young man with dark hair and a wide smile, standing in front of a building Marcus recognized as the Space Needle. And then, nothing. The trail went cold. The news moved on. A young man who'd dreamed of being an architect, who'd spent his Sundays at estate sales, who'd given away his birthday present to a stranger, had been reduced to 2 paragraphs and a cold case number. Marcus stared at Danny's photo on his laptop screen, at that smile full of hope and kindness, and felt something harden in his chest. He'd built a company worth $500 million. He'd networked with senators and tech giants and venture capitalists who controlled the flow of money that shaped the world. He'd learned how to navigate systems, how to find pressure points, how to make things happen. It was time to put that knowledge to use. He pulled up his contacts and found the name he was looking for. Rebecca Torres, a criminal defense attorney who'd made her name taking on police misconduct cases, who'd once told him over drinks at a fundraiser that the justice system was designed to protect the powerful and forget everyone else. The phone rang 3 times before she answered, her voice sharp with professional curiosity. Marcus Chen. It's 11:30 on a Tuesday night. This is either very good news or very bad news. I need your help investigating a cold case murder, Marcus said without preamble. A 21-year-old kid named Daniel Reeves, shot in Madison Valley 6 years ago. The police gave up after 3 weeks. There was a pause on the other end of the line, and Marcus could almost hear Rebecca's mind working, calculating angles and strategies. Why? She asked finally. What's your connection to this case? Marcus looked down at the portfolio in his lap, at the signature that had guided him for 6 years. He saved my life once, and I didn't even know his name until tonight. Tell me everything, Rebecca said, and Marcus heard the rustle of paper, the snap of a laptop opening. Start from the beginning. So he did. He told her about the rain and the broken-down car and the panic that had nearly consumed him. He told her about Danny's kindness, about the drive across town, about the portfolio that had become a talisman. He told her about Elena, about her 2 jobs and her exhaustion and her quiet fury at a system that had failed her brother. When he finished, Rebecca was quiet for a long moment. Then she said, I'll take the case, pro bono, before you even offer to pay. But Marcus, you need to understand, cold cases are cold for a reason. 6 years is a long time. Evidence degrades. Witnesses' memories fade. Files get lost. And the Madison Valley shooting, from what little I remember, was written off as random street violence. Getting anyone to care enough to reopen it is going to be an uphill battle. I don't care how steep the hill is, Marcus said. I've got good climbing equipment. Rebecca laughed, a sound like breaking glass. That's what I like about you, Chen. You still think money and influence can fix everything. Can't they? Sometimes, she admitted. But sometimes the system is broken in ways that even billionaires can't repair. Sometimes all you can do is bear witness to the injustice and try to prevent it from happening again. Then that's what we'll do, Marcus said. But we start by trying to get justice for Danny. His sister deserves that much. Agreed, Rebecca said. I'll start pulling the case file tomorrow. In the meantime, you should prepare yourself for what we might find. Or what we might not find. This could end with no answers and more pain for the sister. Her name is Elena, Marcus said, and she's already carrying enough pain for a lifetime. At least this way, she won't be carrying it alone. They talked logistics for a few more minutes. Timelines, resources, what information he could provide, and then hung up. Marcus sat in the back of his Tesla, watching the city lights blur past, feeling the weight of responsibility settling deeper into his bones. His phone buzzed with another message. This one from Elena. Thank you again. I still can't believe this is real. You've given me hope for the first time in years. Please don't let it be false hope. Marcus typed back quickly. I promise you, it's real. We're gonna find out what happened to Danny. Whatever it takes. 3 dots appeared, then disappeared, then appeared again. Finally, my brother saw something good in you. I'm starting to see it too. The driver pulled up to Marcus's building, a luxury high-rise in Belltown with views of Elliott Bay and the Olympic Mountains. Marcus thanked him and rode the elevator up to the penthouse, his mind already racing ahead to tomorrow, to the calls he'd need to make, the favors he'd need to call in, the wheels he'd need to set in motion. The apartment was dark and silent, decorated in the minimalist style that design magazines loved. All clean lines and expensive simplicity. Marcus had paid someone 6 figures to make it look like no one lived there, and most days it felt true. He worked 18-hour days, slept 5 hours a night, filled his time with meetings and acquisitions and strategic planning sessions that determined the futures of hundreds of employees. He'd forgotten what it felt like to care about something that couldn't be quantified in spreadsheets and quarterly reports. Marcus set the portfolio on his desk, under the warm glow of his desk lamp, and opened it again to Danny's signature. Dream big, work hard, stay kind. 3 simple directives that Danny had lived by, that had guided him to help a panicking stranger on a rainy March morning, that had ultimately meant nothing when someone put a bullet in his chest 3 blocks from home. I'm going to find out what happened to you, Marcus said aloud to the empty apartment, to the ghost of a young man he'd barely known but who'd changed everything. I'm going to make sure your sister knows your death mattered, that you mattered. And if the system failed you, I'm going to burn it down and build something better. The city sprawled out below him, thousands of lights representing thousands of lives, each one carrying their own griefs and hopes and unfinished stories. Somewhere out there, in a studio apartment she shared with 2 roommates, Elena Reeves was probably lying awake, staring at her phone, wondering if this time would be different, if the stranger with his money and his promises would actually follow through where everyone else had failed. Marcus wouldn't let her down. He couldn't. Danny had shown him kindness when he'd had nothing to offer in return, had invested 15 minutes of his minimum wage shift in a stranger's desperate hope. The least Marcus could do was invest everything he had in making sure that kindness hadn't died with its source. He pulled up his calendar and started canceling meetings, clearing his schedule for the next few weeks. His assistant would panic in the morning, would try to convince him that these meetings were crucial, that Zenith Technologies couldn't afford for its CEO to disappear into a personal crusade. But Zenith Technologies existed because of Danny Reeves. Every algorithm, every innovation, every life saved by their diagnostic AI platform. It all traced back to that rainy March morning, to a young man who'd valued kindness over convenience, who'd seen someone in need and helped without hesitation or calculation. The company could survive a few weeks without Marcus. Hell, it would probably run better. His COO was brilliant and had been angling for more authority anyway. But Elena couldn't survive another 6 years of carrying her grief alone, of working herself to exhaustion while the world forgot her brother, of watching justice get deferred and delayed until it became denial. Marcus sent one more text before turning off his phone. Rebecca Torres will be calling you tomorrow. She's the best criminal defense attorney in the state, and she's going to help us investigate Danny's case. Don't worry about costs or fees. Just tell her everything you remember. Every detail matters." The response came almost immediately. "Why are you doing this? You don't owe me anything." Marcus thought about how to answer that, about all the complex motivations tangled up in this impulse. Guilt and gratitude and the uncomfortable recognition of his own privilege, the knowledge that he lived in a world where he could throw around $50,000 like it was nothing while people like Elena worked themselves to death for survival. But in the end, he kept it simple. "Because your brother taught me that the only thing that matters is staying kind. I'm just trying to live up to his example." He closed his laptop, turned off the lights, and stood at the floor-to-ceiling windows, looking out at Seattle's glittering skyline. Somewhere in that vast geometry of light and shadow, there were answers waiting to be found. Evidence that had been overlooked. Witnesses who'd been afraid to speak. Systems that had failed because failing was easier than fighting. Marcus Chen had built his fortune by solving problems other people thought were unsolvable. He'd taught machines to diagnose diseases that baffled human doctors. He'd created algorithms that could predict outcomes no one else could see. Surely he could figure out who killed Danny Reeves. Surely he could give Elena the closure she deserved. Surely he could prove that one act of kindness on a rainy March morning mattered enough to move mountains. Elena Reeves had learned to measure her life in shifts. The morning shift at Pacific Grove Market started at 6 a.m., which meant waking at 4:30 to catch the bus from her apartment in Northgate. She'd share a Pop-Tart with her roommate Jessica, who worked nights at a call center and was usually just getting home, their ships passing in the pre-dawn darkness. Then it was 35 minutes on the 41 bus, standing room. Only most mornings, her body swaying with emotion while her mind drifted through the endless calculations that governed her existence. Rent due in 8 days, phone bill overdue by 3, student loan payment automatically withdrawing in 2 weeks, the careful mathematics of survival that left no room for error. The grocery store was a sprawling palace of plenty, where Elena spent 8 hours stocking shelves, running register, dealing with customers who saw through her rather than at her. She'd become expert at the smile that meant nothing, the "have a great day," delivered with just enough enthusiasm to pass inspection but not enough to suggest she actually cared whether their day was great or terrible. Mrs. Patterson, the store manager, was a woman who'd spent 40 years in retail and believed suffering built character. She watched the employees with hawk eyes, timing bathroom breaks, docking 15 minutes of pay if you clocked in at 6:01 instead of 6 o'clock, writing people up for leaning against counters during 12-hour shifts where your feet swelled inside cheap sneakers that you couldn't afford to replace. Elena had learned to move constantly, to look busy even when there was nothing to do, to anticipate Mrs. Patterson's rounds and position herself strategically near tasks that needed doing. She'd learned that complaining was pointless, that asking for a raise was met with speeches about economic realities and market rates, that calling in sick, even with doctor's notes, was treated as moral failure. She'd learned that being poor meant your body wasn't really yours. It belonged to your employers, to the demands of schedules that changed with 3 hours' notice, to the expectation that you'd smile through harassment from customers who felt entitled to her emotional labor along with their groceries. At 2:30 p.m., Elena's shift ended. She had exactly 90 minutes to get home, shower, change into her Luminaire uniform, and catch the bus back downtown for the dinner shift that started at 5. On good days, she managed 20 minutes to eat something, usually leftovers from the restaurant that servers were allowed to take. Yesterday's bread, soup that had been sitting too long, the ends of expensive cuts of meat that couldn't be served to paying customers but were fine for staff. On bad days, she worked straight through, running on coffee and adrenaline and the grim determination that had carried her through 6 years of grief. The apartment she shared with Jessica and another roommate, Marcus. Yes, the coincidence of names had occurred to her last night, had felt like some kind of cosmic joke, was a cramped studio in a building that barely met code. The landlord fixed nothing unless legally forced to. The heating rattled and wheezed. The shower had 2 temperatures, scalding or ice. The walls were so thin that Elena could hear every argument, every late-night TV show, every intimate moment from the neighbors on all sides. She decorated her small corner with things from estate sales, framed prints of architectural drawings that reminded her of Danny, a vintage lamp that cast warm light, a bookshelf built from cinder blocks and reclaimed wood where she kept the books she never had time to read. It was an attempt to create beauty in a space designed for transients, for people who were always one paycheck away from eviction. But last night, everything had changed. Elena sat on her bed, really just a mattress on the floor with clean sheets she'd bought at Target, and stared at her phone screen, at the number that still didn't seem real, $50,000. She'd checked it 17 times since getting home, convinced it would disappear, that it had been a mistake, that she'd wake up and find it had all been a fever dream born of exhaustion. But it remained solid and real and impossible. Preparing and narrating this type of story took us long efforts and hard work. So if you are enjoying the story, please consider subscribing to our channel. Jessica had screamed when Elena told her, had grabbed her and spun her around the tiny apartment until they were both dizzy and laughing and crying. Marcus, roommate Marcus, not billionaire Marcus, had emerged from his corner looking confused, then stunned, then genuinely happy in the way that good people are when something good finally happens to someone who deserves it. They'd stayed up until 3 a.m. talking about what this meant, about the possibilities that had suddenly opened up like windows in a room that had been suffocating. Elena could quit one of her jobs, could go back to school, could breathe for the first time since Danny died, since she'd used his life insurance money to pay for his burial and his debts, since she'd learned that the world didn't stop for grief, that bills came due whether or not your heart was broken. But underneath the joy and the relief, there was something else, a dangerous thing called hope. Elena had learned not to hope. Hope was what got you hurt. Hope was what made you think the police would actually investigate your brother's murder, would treat it as anything other than another dead kid from a family without connections or money or power. Hope was what made you believe that justice existed for people like Danny, like her, like everyone who worked themselves to death for wages that barely covered survival. She'd called her mother at midnight, knowing Carla Reeves would still be awake, still be watching late-night TV in the house in Spokane where Elena had grown up, where Danny's childhood bedroom remained untouched like a shrine to a future that would never happen. "Mama," Elena had said, and then couldn't continue, the words catching in her throat. "Baby, what's wrong?" Her mother's voice had gone sharp with instant worry, the tone of someone who'd learned that late-night calls meant catastrophe. "Nothing's wrong. Something's right. For the first time in forever, something's actually right." She told her mother everything, about the signature, about Marcus Chen, about the money and the promises and the lawyer who was supposed to call today. She'd heard her mother cry, quiet sobs that Carla tried to muffle, the sound of a woman who'd spent 6 years being strong, being practical, being the one who held the family together through the unraveling. "Don't get your hopes up too high, Mija," her mother had finally said, her voice rough. "I don't want to see you hurt again. These rich people, they make promises all the time. They feel guilty for 5 minutes, they throw some money around, and then they go back to their lives and forget all about us." "I know, Mama, I know. But what if this time is different? And what if it's not?" Elena hadn't had an answer for that. She still didn't. But she'd promised Marcus Chen she'd talk to the lawyer, would tell her everything she remembered about Danny's death, about the investigation that had barely been an investigation, about the police detectives who'd treated her family's grief as an inconvenience. Her phone rang at exactly 9 a.m., the number showing up as Torres and Associates. Elena's hands shook as she answered. "Miss Reeves? This is Rebecca Torres. Marcus Chen asked me to call you." The voice was crisp, professional, carrying the kind of confidence that Elena associated with people who'd never had to doubt their place in the world. But there was warmth underneath, something that suggested this wasn't just a billionaire's favor being grudgingly fulfilled. "Yes, hi. Thank you for calling." Elena heard how small her own voice sounded, how uncertain. "I understand your brother Daniel was killed 6 years ago, and that the case remains unsolved. I'd like to meet with you today if possible, go over everything you remember. Are you free this afternoon?" Elena thought of her shift at Millionaire, of the money she'd lose by calling out, of Mrs. Patterson's disapproval. Then she thought of the $50,000 sitting in her account, of the fact that for the first time in 6 years, she could afford to miss a shift without calculating how many meals it would cost her. "Yes," she said, her voice stronger now. "Yes, I'm free." They arranged to meet at 2 p.m. at Rebecca's office in Pioneer Square. Elena spent the morning in a daze, moving through her apartment like a ghost, pulling out the box she kept under her bed. The box she couldn't look at most days because it hurt too much. Inside were the remnants of Danny's life. His wallet, returned to them by the police with his driver's license and his Redwood Roasters employee card, and a photo of the two of them at Green Lake, 7 years old and 9 years old, before their father left, before their mother started working 3 jobs, before the world taught them that being poor meant being disposable. There were the newspaper clippings Elena had saved, those 2 brief articles that had reduced Danny's life to a statistic. There was his phone, which the police had kept for 3 months before returning it, the battery long dead, the screen cracked from where it had fallen when he fell. There was the police report, which Elena had obtained through a public records request after calling and emailing, and showing up at the precinct so many times that the desk sergeant had finally given it to her just to make her go away. She'd read it until she had it memorized, until the clinical language of official documentation had burned itself into her brain. Victim discovered at approximately 10:47 p.m. by passerby who called 911. Single gunshot wound to the chest. No witnesses. No suspect description. Personal effects undisturbed. Me places time of death between 10:30 and 11 p.m. Victim's cell phone shows last activity at 10:36 p.m. Text message to mother saying, "Heading home. Love you." That text message had been the last thing Danny ever wrote. Love you. 2 words that had to carry the weight of everything unsaid. Everything that would never be said. All the conversations they'd never have and the future he'd never live. Elena packed everything carefully into her backpack and caught the bus downtown. Pioneer Square was old Seattle, the neighborhood that predated the tech boom, with its brick buildings and hidden speakeasies, and the kind of character that developers were constantly trying to erase in favor of glass towers and corporate uniformity. Rebecca Torres' office was on the 3rd floor of a building that had probably been a warehouse once, converted now into the kind of creative spaces where architects and designers and progressive lawyers set up shop. The waiting room was small but comfortable, decorated with art that looked like it came from local artists, not corporate suppliers. Rebecca herself was in her mid-40s, with dark hair shot through with silver and eyes that missed nothing. She wore a tailored suit that managed to look both professional and rebellious, paired with vintage boots that Elena recognized as being worth several $100s. This was someone who'd made it, who'd climbed out of whatever circumstances she'd started in and built something on her own terms. "Elena," Rebecca said, standing to shake her hand. Her grip was firm, confident. "Thank you for coming. I know this can't be easy." They sat across from each other, Elena clutching her backpack like a lifeline. Rebecca had a yellow legal pad and a recorder on the table between them. "Before we start," Rebecca said, "I want to be honest with you about what we're facing. Cold cases are incredibly difficult to crack. 6 years is a long time. Witnesses move away, memories fade, evidence degrades. And from what Marcus told me, the initial investigation was minimal." "They didn't care," Elena said flatly. "Danny was just another dead kid from a poor family. No one important. Not worth the resources." Rebecca's expression hardened. "I've seen it before. Too many times. The justice system runs on triage, and cases like your brother's, young men of modest means, killed in circumstances that can be written off as random violence, they get deprioritized. It's not right. It's not justice. But it's reality." "So why are you taking the case?" Elena asked. "If it's so hopeless, why bother?" Rebecca leaned back in her chair, considering her answer. "Because sometimes the hopeless cases are the ones that matter most. Because someone needs to care when the system doesn't. And because Marcus Chen called me at midnight and told me about a kid who gave away his birthday present to help a stranger. And I thought, that's the kind of person whose death should be solved. That's the kind of story that deserves an ending." Elena felt tears prick her eyes again. She was so tired of crying, so tired of being the grieving sister, the tragic figure people felt sorry for. But here, in this office with this woman who seemed to genuinely care, it felt okay to let the grief show. "Tell me everything," Rebecca said gently. "Start from the beginning. Who was Danny?" So Elena did. She talked about their childhood in Spokane, about how Danny had been her protector, her best friend, the one who'd walked her to school every day and taught her how to throw a punch when kids made fun of her second-hand clothes. She talked about how he'd loved buildings, had spent hours sketching impossible structures in notebooks he bought with allowance money saved for months. She talked about how they'd moved to Seattle together after high school, both of them chasing dreams that seemed more possible in a city that promised reinvention. How Danny had worked at Redwood Roasters while taking community college classes, saving every penny for the architecture program at University of Washington. How he'd been 3/4 away from applying, how he'd had his portfolio half finished, how he talked endlessly about sustainable design and buildings that honored their environment instead of dominating it. He was kind, Elena said, her voice breaking. That was the thing everyone said at his funeral. 90 people came, and they all had stories about how Danny had helped them, lent them money he didn't have, talked them through breakups and family drama, showed up when he said he would. He was the most dependable person I've ever known, and he died 3 blocks from home because someone decided his life was worth less than whatever they thought they could take from him. Rebecca was taking notes, her pen moving steadily across the page. Walk me through the day he died. Everything you remember. Elena closed her eyes, pulling up memories she'd replayed 1,000 times, looking for clues she'd missed, for warning signs that hadn't been there. It was a Tuesday. Danny had worked the morning shift at the coffee shop. He came home around 3, said he'd sold a painting to some guy whose car broke down, that the guy had seemed really stressed and Danny had helped him. Rebecca looked up sharply. A painting? Marcus said it was a portfolio. Danny called everything art, Elena explained with a sad smile. The portfolio, the books on our shelves, good design, it was all painting to him. He used to say that life was about creating beauty wherever you could, even in small things. Did he mention anything else about this encounter? Just that the guy had an important meeting and Danny drove him there. He was excited about it, said it felt good to help someone who really needed it. I teased him about being too nice, about how he was going to give away everything we owned if I didn't watch him. The memory twisted like a knife. She'd been joking. It had been affectionate exasperation, the kind siblings show when they love each other. She'd had no idea it would be one of the last conversations they'd ever have. He left for his evening shift at 6, Elena continued. Texted me around 8 asking if I wanted him to bring home food. I said no, I'd already eaten. He sent me a meme around 9:30. Something stupid about architects and coffee addiction. I sent back a laughing emoji. Her voice was mechanical now, reciting facts to keep the emotion at bay. His shift ended at 10:30. He texted Mom at 10:36 saying he was heading home. The walk from the coffee shop to our apartment was 12 minutes. We timed it. He never made it. Who found him? A woman walking her dog. She heard the gunshot, saw him fall. Called 911 immediately. The police got there in 6 minutes. The EMTs were there in 8. None of it mattered. He was already gone. Rebecca's pen had stopped moving. She was just listening now, bearing witness to Elena's grief with a stillness that felt respectful, earned. The detective assigned to the case was named Richard Morrison, Elena said, pulling out the police report. He interviewed me and my mom once. Spent maybe 45 minutes total. Asked basic questions. Did Danny have enemies? Was he involved in drugs? Did he owe anyone money? When we said no to everything, he seemed almost disappointed. Like he wanted Danny to be a drug dealer or a gang member so the case would make sense. Did Morrison follow up after that initial interview? Twice. Once to tell us they had no leads. Once to tell us the case was going cold and they were moving resources to more active investigations. Elena's voice dripped with bitterness. I called him every week for a year, left messages, sent emails, showed up at the precinct. Finally, he told me I needed to accept that some cases don't get solved, that random street violence is just part of living in a city. But Danny's wallet wasn't taken, Rebecca said, flipping through the police report. His phone wasn't taken. If this was a robbery, it was the worst robbery I've ever heard of. I said that to Morrison. He said maybe the shooter got spooked. Maybe someone was coming. Maybe it was a gang initiation gone wrong. Maybe. 1,000 maybes and 0 answers. Rebecca stood and walked to her window, looking out at Pioneer Square below where tourists were taking photos of the iron pergola and the totem pole. Tell me about the neighborhood where Danny was killed. Madison Valley. What was it like 6 years ago? Gentrifying, Elena said immediately. Half old Seattle, half new money moving in. Coffee shops getting replaced by juice bars. Vintage stores becoming boutiques. Rent going up every year, pushing out the people who'd lived there for decades. There was tension. People angry about being priced out of their own neighborhoods. Was Danny involved in any activism? Any protests against development? Elena shook her head. Danny wasn't political like that. He believed in changing things through creation, not destruction. He wanted to design affordable housing, wanted to prove that beauty didn't have to be expensive. But he wasn't going to protests or signing petitions. He was too busy working and studying and trying to survive. Rebecca came back to her desk, her expression thoughtful. I'm going to need to pull all the original case files, interview Morrison and whoever else worked the investigation, canvass the neighborhood again. It's been 6 years, but sometimes people remember things they didn't think were important at the time. Sometimes they're willing to talk now when they weren't willing then. Do you think you can find who killed him? Elena asked, hating how desperate she sounded, how much she needed the stranger to say yes. I think I can try, Rebecca said carefully. And I think having Marcus Chen's resources behind us opens doors that would normally stay closed. Money talks, Elena. Shouldn't, but it does. And we're going to use every advantage we have. I still don't understand why he's doing this, Elena admitted. We're strangers. Danny helped him once 6 years ago. That shouldn't be worth this much effort. Rebecca smiled slightly. Marcus called me at midnight and talked for an hour about your brother's kindness. About how that one act of generosity changed the trajectory of his entire company, his entire life. He's carrying guilt, yes, but he's also carrying gratitude. And he's smart enough to recognize that the world that let him succeed is the same world that failed Danny. He wants to balance the scales. Can't bring Danny back, Elena said softly. No, Rebecca agreed. But we can find the truth. We can make sure Danny's death isn't just another unsolved case file. We can show you and your mother that his life mattered enough for someone to fight for justice. Sometimes that has to be enough. They spent another 2 hours going through everything. The timeline of Danny's last day, the people he knew, the places he frequented, the dreams he'd had and the person he'd been. Elena pulled out his phone, which Rebecca took carefully, promising to have her tech consultant try to recover any data that might still be salvageable. She pulled out the newspaper clippings, the police report, the photos from Danny's funeral where 90 people had gathered to mourn a 21-year-old who'd made the world better just by being in it. When Elena finally left Rebecca's office, it was after 5 p.m. She'd missed her shift at Millionaire, which would normally have sent her into a panic spiral about lost wages and potential consequences. But she pulled out her phone and looked at the number that was still there, still real, $50,000. She called the restaurant and told them she was sick. It was the first time in 18 months she'd called out, and the manager's surprise was evident even through his irritation. She didn't care. For the first time in 6 years, she had the luxury of not caring about whether one shift would get her fired, whether speaking up would cost her. Instead of going home, Elena walked through Pioneer Square, through the neighborhood where Seattle's past and present collided in complicated ways. She found herself at the Seattle Architectural Museum, a place she and Danny had visited on free admission days, where they'd spent hours looking at models and drawings and photographs of buildings that reached for the sky. She paid the $15 admission fee, an expense she'd never have allowed herself yesterday, and wandered through exhibits until the museum closed. She looked at blueprints and renderings, at visions of cities that could be, at beauty born from function, at everything Danny had loved and would never create. In the gift shop, she bought a book, Sustainable Architecture, Building for Tomorrow. Cost $45. She didn't hesitate. On the bus ride home, Elena opened the book and found herself reading about green roofs and solar panels and building materials that didn't destroy the environment. She read about architects who believed design could change lives, who saw beauty and function as inseparable, who wanted to create spaces that honored both people and planet. It was everything Danny had believed in, everything he'd wanted to do. Elena pulled out her phone and texted Chen. "Thank you for giving me time to remember my brother as he was, not just as how he died. Tomorrow I meet with your lawyer again. We're going to find the truth." The response came within minutes. "Rebecca is the best. She won't stop until we have answers. And Elena, take care of yourself. Danny would want that." Elena stared at that message for a long moment, feeling something shift inside her chest. For 6 years, she'd existed in survival mode, moving from shift to shift, paycheck to paycheck, running on empty because stopping meant feeling, and feeling meant falling apart. But maybe it was okay to fall apart a little. Maybe it was okay to feel the grief she'd been holding at arm's length because she couldn't afford the time it took to properly mourn. Maybe it was okay to hope. When she got home, Jessica was already there, sprawled on the couch watching reality TV with the volume too loud because the remote was broken and they couldn't afford to replace it. "How'd it go with the lawyer?" Jessica asked, sitting up. "She thinks we can find something," Elena said. "She thinks there are answers. We just have to dig deep enough." Jessica squealed and grabbed her in a hug that was too tight, too enthusiastic, pure joy at seeing her friend finally catching a break. They ordered pizza. Real pizza, not the cheap frozen kind, and spent the evening talking about possibilities, about what Elena could do with the money Marcus had given her, about the future that had suddenly opened up where before there'd only been a treadmill of endless work. But late that night, after Jessica had gone to bed and the apartment was quiet except for the sounds of neighbors living their lives, Elena pulled out the book she'd bought at the museum. She turned to a random page and found a quote. "Architecture is the will of an epic translated into space." Danny had believed that buildings could tell stories, that design could express values, that the way we shaped our environment shaped us in return. She picked up her phone and opened her photos, scrolling back 6 years to the pictures she couldn't usually look at. Danny at his graduation from community college, grinning with his certificate. Danny at their apartment, measuring walls and sketching ideas for how to make the cramped space more functional. Danny at Green Lake with her, both of them soaked from jumping in the water fully clothed on a dare. Danny alive, Danny whole, Danny full of dreams and plans and that unshakable kindness that had defined him. "I'm going to make sure they remember you right," Elena whispered to the photos, to the ghost of her brother who'd given his birthday present away to a stranger and changed someone's life without knowing it. Not as a victim, not as a statistic, as Daniel Christopher Reeves, who dreamed of building a better world and who showed kindness when it cost him everything. She set her phone aside and opened her laptop. An old thing that barely worked, held together with determination and electrical tape. She typed Daniel Reeves Memorial Scholarship into Google and started researching how to set up educational funds for students studying sustainable architecture. $50,000 wouldn't bring Danny back, but it could help other kids like him, other dreamers from poor families who wanted to create beauty, who believed that design could change the world. It was a start. It was something. And for the first time in 6 years, Elena Reeves let herself believe that something could be enough. Chen stood in front of Redwood Roasters at 7 a.m., staring at the brick facade that had barely changed in 6 years. The coffee shop was tucked between a vintage clothing store and a Thai restaurant in Madison Valley, the kind of neighborhood place that had somehow survived the gentrification eating through Seattle like a slow-motion earthquake. Through the window, he could see the morning rush, commuters grabbing lattes before work, regulars reading newspapers in worn armchairs, baristas moving with the practiced efficiency of people who'd made 1,000 drinks before and would make 1,000 more before the day ended. The air smelled like espresso and cinnamon, warm and inviting, a pocket of comfort in the October cold. Marcus hadn't been back since that March morning 6 years ago when his car had died and Danny Reeves had saved his life. He'd meant to return, had told himself he would, once things settled down, once the funding was secured and the company stabilized. But time had a way of accelerating when you were successful, days blurring into weeks into years, and suddenly half a decade had passed and he'd never found the time to say thank you properly. Guilt sat heavy in his stomach as he pushed open the door, triggering a bell that chimed cheerfully. Heads turned briefly, registering another customer, then returned to conversations and phones and the private rituals of morning caffeine. The counter had changed, new espresso machine, updated menu board, but the bones of the place were the same. Exposed brick walls covered with local art, mismatched furniture that looked rescued from yard sales, a bulletin board plastered with community notices and lost cat flyers and advertisements for yoga classes. The barista behind the counter was a woman in her 50s with gray-streaked hair and kind eyes, wearing a Redwood Roasters apron over a flannel shirt. Her name tag read Maureen. "What can I get you?" she asked, smiling with the practiced warmth of career service workers. "Large coffee, black," Marcus said. Then, before he could second-guess himself, "And any information you can give me about Daniel Reeves." The smile fell from Maureen's face. She went very still, her hand frozen on the espresso machine portafilter. "Who's asking?" "My name is Marcus Chen. Danny helped me 6 years ago, the week before he died. I never got the chance to thank him." Maureen studied him for a long moment, her expression cycling through suspicion, grief, and finally recognition. "You're the tech guy, the one from the videos." Marcus had forgotten about the videos. His phone had been blowing up for 3 days, his PR team in crisis mode, news outlets requesting interviews, social media dissecting his every word and action. The footage from Luminaire had gone viral. Millionaire CEO gives Waitress $50,000 after discovering connection to man who helped him. The narrative had taken on a life of its own, people projecting their hopes and frustrations onto a 30-second clip of him and Elena at a table. "Yes," Marcus said simply. "That's me." Maureen's eyes filled with tears. She turned away, busying herself with making his coffee, her shoulders trembling slightly. When she turned back, she'd composed herself, but her voice was thick. "Danny was my favorite employee. Hell, one of my favorite people, period. Always early, always cheerful, always going out of his way to help customers. He remembered everyone's names, their orders, their kids' names. Made this place feel like community instead of just commerce." She slid the coffee across the counter. Marcus tried to pay, but she waved him off. "Danny would have given you this for free. Least I can do is honor his memory." "Can we talk?" Marcus asked. "I'm trying to understand what happened to him. I've hired an investigator, a lawyer. We're reopening the case." Maureen's expression shifted, hope and skepticism warring for dominance. "The police already investigated. Said they couldn't find anything." "The police didn't try hard enough," Marcus said bluntly. "And I'm not limited by their resources or their priorities. I want to find who killed Danny. His sister deserves answers." "Elena," Maureen said softly. "Sweet girl. Came in here after Danny died. Just sat in his favorite chair for hours crying. Broke my heart." She looked around the coffee shop, checking whether anyone was listening, then gestured to an empty table in the corner. "My manager's running late. I've got 10 minutes before the rush really hits. Let's talk." They sat, and Marcus pulled out his phone, opening the Notes app. "Tell me about Danny's last day. He worked the morning shift, right?" Maureen nodded. 6 a.m. to 2 p.m. It was a Tuesday, so moderately busy but nothing crazy. Danny was his usual self, laughing with regulars, making conversation, upselling pastries like his life depended on it. She laughed wetly. The kid could sell anything. He genuinely believed in what he was serving, you know? Wasn't just going through the motions. "Did anything unusual happen that day? Any problems? Conflicts? Strange customers?" Maureen frowned, thinking back. "Not that I remember. Wait, there was that guy who came in soaking wet. Said his car broke down. Danny helped him out, drove him somewhere. Came back talking about how he'd given the guy a portfolio, how it felt good to help someone who really needed it." "That was me," Marcus said quietly. Maureen's eyes widened. "You're the portfolio guy. Danny was so happy about that. Said he'd helped someone with big dreams, someone who was going to change things. He was right, wasn't he? I looked up your company. You're doing good work." "Because of him," Marcus said. "I wouldn't have made it to that meeting without Danny. Everything I built started that morning." They sat in silence for a moment, the weight of that connection hanging between them. Then Marcus pushed forward. "Did Danny mention anything else? Anyone giving him trouble? Following him? Any sense that something was wrong? No, Maureen said. That's what made his death so senseless. There was no warning, no build-up. Just a regular day, and then he was gone. She wiped her eyes with her apron. The police came by asking questions. Talked to all of us who'd worked with him. We told them Danny didn't have enemies. Wasn't involved in anything shady. Was just a good kid trying to make it through life. But the investigation went nowhere. They stopped coming around after 2 weeks, Maureen confirmed. I called the detective myself, Detective Morrison, asked what they were doing to find Danny's killer. He gave me some line about pursuing all leads, but I could tell he'd already moved on. Danny was just another case filed to him. The anger in her voice was palpable. Years of frustration finally finding an outlet. You know what the worst part was? The coffee shop got targeted after Danny died. Graffiti, broken windows, threatening phone calls. Someone spray-painted snitches get stitches on our door. We reported it to the police, and they said it was probably just random vandalism. Nothing to do with Danny's case. Marcus's head snapped up. When did this happen? About a month after Danny died. Went on for 3 weeks, then stopped as suddenly as it started. Did you tell Detective Morrison about this? Of course. He said they'd look into it, but nothing came of it. Eventually, we just cleaned up the mess and installed security cameras. But the damage was done. Some of our regulars stopped coming, said they didn't feel safe. Took months to rebuild the customer base. Marcus typed furiously into his phone, flagging this information for Rebecca. Vandalism and threats following a murder investigation that was going nowhere. That wasn't random. That was intimidation, someone trying to shut down questions before they led somewhere dangerous. Do you still have security footage from that time? He asked. Maureen shook her head regretfully. We only keep footage for 90 days. After that, it records over itself. And 6 years ago, our system was even more basic. What about from the night Danny died? Did you have cameras then? We did, but they only covered the interior of the shop and the immediate entrance. The police took the footage, but it didn't show anything useful. Danny left at 10:32 p.m., walked out of frame, that was it. Marcus thought through the timeline. Danny had texted his mother at 10:36 p.m., for minutes after leaving work. He'd been shot somewhere between the coffee shop and his apartment, a 12-minute walk that he'd never completed. I need to walk the route, Marcus said, from here to where Danny lived. Can you tell me his address? Maureen pulled out her phone, scrolling through old contacts. Madison Avenue Apartments, Building 847. He shared a place with Elena in a studio on the 3rd floor. Marcus stood. Thank you, Maureen. If you think of anything else, anything at all, please call me. He handed her a business card with his personal cell number. She took it, holding it carefully like something precious. Find who did this, she said fiercely. Danny deserved better than to be forgotten. He deserved better than 15 seconds on the evening news and a case file gathering dust. I'm going to try, Marcus promised, and I'm going to make sure people remember him the right way, not as a victim, but as someone who made the world better just by being in it. He left the coffee shop and started walking, following the route Danny would have taken. Madison Valley was awake now, the morning rush filling sidewalks with people heading to bus stops and light rail stations, beginning their days in the city that never stopped moving. The neighborhood was definitely more gentrified than Marcus remembered from 6 years ago. More boutique fitness studios, more farm-to-table restaurants, more wine bars with names like Vintage and The QV. But there were still remnants of old Seattle, family-owned faux restaurants, a hardware store that had been there for 50 years, apartment buildings that weren't sleek glass towers. Marcus walked those 12 blocks slowly, imagining Danny's last moments. At the corner of Madison and 29th, he found it. Faded police tape still clinging to a chain-link fence, marking where a young man's dreams had ended. He knelt there, placing his hand on the cold concrete, making a silent promise. 3 months later, Rebecca Torres stood in a precinct conference room, presenting evidence that would reopen the case. Security footage they'd recovered. Witnesses finally willing to talk. a pattern of witness intimidation the original investigation had ignored. Elena Reeves stood beside her, no longer exhausted, no longer alone. The Daniel Reeves Memorial Scholarship had funded its first student. And somewhere in the city, Danny's kindness continued rippling outward, changing lives he'd never meet. Justice was slow, but it was coming. Preparing and narrating this type of story took us long efforts and hard work. So if you are enjoying the story, please consider subscribing to our channel.